After taking a look back at the spring game, let's talk about what Conner Weigman did to stand out.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. Today, I want to break down a little bit, a throwback to the spring game, and kind of talk about what Conner Weigman did that impressed me, what he did that concerned me, and what he did that I wasn't much impressed with. We're going to talk a little bit about the rest of what the offense did to kind of stand out. We'll talk about that at the end of segment 1, segment 2, but getting right into it with Conner Weigman. I watched the tape multiple times a month ago. And then, so I probably watched that highlight tape back 3 or 4 times. And then I didn't watch it. And then I watched it again because sometimes I've noticed, same like with the movie, you notice things you didn't notice the first time. And I've obviously been very vocal with how high I am on Conner Weigman this season. But there were a few things in the spring game that did concern me a little bit with that take. Then I watched the game back and I was like, a lot of this, you hate saying wasn't his fault, but there were a lot of things, a lot of throws he made, a lot of decisions he made that really weren't his fault. And we're going to kind of break it down. So first drive, Weigman looked great. He wasn't able to get his team in the end zone the first couple of drives. They were only able to put up a couple of field goals. And I had saw that as a takeaway on some different publications writing about the Aggies. And my first reaction was, okay, let's break this down. Why was he not able to put the ball in the end zone? What I noticed was he threw a lot of passes right on the dot to wide receivers, and the receivers just weren't able to reel them in, A, or B, there was just outstanding coverage by the secondary. So a lot of these throws, it was at least 2 or 3 throws on those 2 possessions when they were close to the end zone, in the red zone, that they stalled. And there were 2 or 3 throws that were where they needed to be. Weigman put them on the dot. And like I said, 1 or 2 things happened. The receivers didn't make the play, or the cornerbacks and safeties had good coverage. So, that to me was a quick takeaway. Like, okay, we can't knock him for balls that were put on the money, because at the end of the day, sometimes stuff's going to happen where you put the ball on the money and there's intangible things that happen that you can't really control. And that's what happened with a few throws. Then there were a few breakdowns on the offensive line that led to people getting in the backfield. Now, of course, in the spring game, you just blow it dead. You don't play through that. So that happened a few times. That's not on Weigman. But the one kind of pass that I would have taken back if I was Weigman, and I'm sure there were more than one. There was a couple of balls thrown behind receivers and different things like that. But the one pass that really stood out to me was an interception. It was one of the last drives before halftime. And it was kind of an out route to a 5-yard out route from the middle of the field to Evan Stewart, which, you got to think about on the football field when you're throwing to the sideline from center of the field, from the other hash, whatever. That's a long throw. So to me, this was kind of just a boneheaded play call. Now, I don't know the inner workings of this. It could have been that wasn't the read he was supposed to be looking at. Maybe Evan Stewart ran the wrong route. I will never say anything negative about Evan Stewart, so I take back that statement. He couldn't have possibly ever done anything wrong. I'm kidding. But, it was a weird route. It was like this ball traveled probably 35 yards in the air for what would have been a 5-yard gain if it was able to get to Stewart and he reeled it in. But there was a kind of a cornerback that played this, that made a great play. The corner didn't bite on the move of his wide receiver he was guarding, and was able to see the ball in the air and make the interception. So, but the thing about it is that the corner that was guarding Stewart, I think, would have made the interception too, because the ball was kind of in the air for a really long time, because it was a long throw for a a long throw for a short gain. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't love that play call. I don't know who made it. Like I said, we've talked about the inner workings of the coaching staff on the offensive side of things with Coach Fisher and Coach Trino. I don't know who called that play. But what I can tell you is there was a lot more positives from what Conner Weigman did than negatives, in my opinion. I think he did a good job. There were a few plays where he used his legs to kind of find an open man. He used his legs to draw some time, and he was smart. There were a few plays where Weigman would use his legs to get to the outside, see there was nobody open, throw the ball out of bounds. So there were a lot more positives than negatives. There were, like I said, a couple balls thrown behind receivers, that one interception, which, I mean, you got to put it on Weigman, but there was something funky about that play that it could have been on Stewart. It could have been just a bad play call. It could have been a bad read. I don't know. I just don't know the inner workings of that play. But I think there were a lot of downfield throws that stood out to me. A handful of them were to Stewart. That connection between them, I mean, he just force feeds him the ball. It's pretty crazy. And the first thing I kind of noticed was that Weigman was putting some balls 30, 40, 50 yards downfield on the dot. A couple to Stewart, a couple to some other guys. He was making plays happen with putting balls where only his receiver could make the play. Like there was one throw, and this is a great example of the reason I think Weigman could be so successful this season, because it was an incomplete pass, but it was a deep ball on the sideline to Evan Stewart. It felt like every pass was almost, and Stewart wasn't able to reel it in. And I'm pretty sure it was in a double coverage, but it was thrown in the perfect spot to where Stewart had a shot at it. And if he didn't catch it, it was incomplete. There was no risk of an interception. He underthrew one ball on a deep route, but on a deep ball, it was a go route. I think it was to Ainias Smith, but he ended up getting bailed out by a pass interference call. A lot of stuff went Weigman's way in this game that, sometimes it isn't always going to go your way in a ball game. But I think he got a little quick feet at times, threw a couple balls behind receivers, and that one interception. But besides that, it was pretty clean. I mean, he was putting balls where they needed to be. He got bailed out once by Evan Stewart on a, I think it was a first or second drive where he kind of he threw a ball a little high, and Stewart climbed the ladder, made an amazing catch. But I think the takeaway from this, and another thing that Weigman did that did stand out to me, was his ability to take what was given to him. And the announcers kept repeating this and saying it, said Weigman was taking what was given him. He wasn't forcing things downfield, which is what young quarterbacks do. They try and force things into places where there's corners, there's safeties, there's linebackers. You don't want to force things. You want to let it happen naturally. You want to let the offense flow. And Weigman was doing that in this game. He was dumping the ball off. He was finding some running backs. He was finding tight ends. He was finding players in the flat. He was taking what the defense gave him, picking up 5, 6, 7 yards at a time when need be. But the deep ball was still there to Evan Stewart a handful of times. He threw a touchdown on a deep ball, kind of like a wheel-looking route play near the end of the third, beginning of the fourth quarter, whenever it was. So I think my main takeaway here was there were a lot of positives to take away from what Weigman did. He is still young. He's a young quarterback. This is, of course, his sophomore year in college. So I'm not saying it's all going to be perfect this year. He's going to make some boat-headed mistakes. He's a young quarterback. He's not what we call a good old wily veteran yet. He hasn't been around a lot. He played in, I think it was 5 games last year, not a ton of snaps compared to some guys. And I think he's going to have to settle in a little bit. But the nice thing is you get to open you open your season against not a great team. Then, of course, you have to go to play Miami. That's going to be a tough game. But if you can win some of these games, it's going to give Weigman a chance to settle in. But I just think the main takeaway from what I saw with Weigman in the spring game was that it was there. There were flashes. You saw it. He's just got to put it all together. And frankly, that's my theme for this season for the Aggies is putting it all together. If the Aggies can put it all together, this team's going to be incredible. If people make mistakes and it doesn't get put together, this team will be so-so. Like you can win games when Weigman's kind of just but you're also going to lose some games where Weigman is If Weigman's great, I think you're going to win more games than not. So I think, rewatching the tape, it almost made me feel a little bit better about my take on Weigman. Like I said, it wasn't all perfect. There were some mistakes. There were some boneheaded plays, some bad decisions, some poor throws. But there was a lot more positive than negative, and definitely a lot of flashes and signs that this guy could be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC when he's wrapping up his career at Texas A&M. Let's talk about some other takeaways from the offensive side of the ball during the spring game. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. The NBA playoffs just ended. I'm sad. This was my first year. My good buddy Bryce got me into the NBA this year. It was my first year being into the NBA. I've always been a college football, college basketball, MLB, and NHL guy my whole life. My buddy Bryce got me into the NBA, and I really like it now. And I was really rooting for what's his name? I was rooting for Joker in the playoffs. I call him, well, everyone calls him Joker, but Nikola Jokic. I was rooting for him. I like him. They won the championship. I'm happy for him there. I think that the NBA season was fun, but I mean, like I say, hey, if you're an NBA fan, I know that's done, but you still got a lot going on here. You still got the NHL. No, I think the Stanley Cup's over too. Ooh, but you got the MLB. Rangers are playing good baseball right now. We're getting close to the All-Star break. Things are heating up. It's a good time to go take out your no-sweat first bet and maybe bet on some MLB. There's some stuff going on here, some futures bets for college football, if that's gets you going. So there's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I think my biggest takeaway on just the offensive side of the ball in general was how much better I feel about the running backs being able to handle the pass catching duties. Last season, we talked a lot. This last couple of days, we've talked a lot about kind of my concern with the fact that Devon Achane was catching the bulk of the passes for the Aggies last season out of the backfield. Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss really weren't getting all that many targets, all that many receptions, and they really weren't getting that much usage in general. But Amari Daniels looked good as a pass catcher. They put him out wide sometimes. Weigman found him in the flat for 6-7 yard gains at times. That to me really was something that was a positive takeaway because frankly, it was a concern for me. I was worried that who was going to be Weigman's safety blanket. And we talked about how much he was using his safety blanket just a minute ago and how important that is for this team as a whole. I mean, you have to, as a quarterback, you have to have a guy that if the deep ball is not there, you're able to say, okay, I'm going to get it to my running back for 5 yards. We're going to live to play another day. I'm not going to force a mistake. So you have to have a running back that's able to do that. And I think that Daniels is going to be that for the Aggies this season. But Le'Veon Moss, I got really excited about Ruben Owens, and I still am. This is in no way a negative on Ruben Owens. I'm excited to see what he can do. I thought he looked good watching the tape back in the spring game as well. But Le'Veon Moss really stood out to me. There was a couple runs where, he's just a beast. He is a mountain. He is hard to bring down. And I think he's going to be a big part of this running back room. And I talk about often how all these guys can kind of do different things. And that's true. I think Daniels could be the guy that's more of the pass catcher, and Le'Veon Moss is more your bruiser. Then Ruben Owens, I think, is kind of a gadget guy. I think he can do all the above there. But we've talked about how all three of these guys are going to get used, and I believe going to get used heavily. But what stood out to me, like I said, was just the fact that they were all impressive in this game. Every one of all three of these guys had a play or two that I was just like, wow. And I think that was kind of the positive for me in this running back room. Was I was worried about the pass catching ability. Rewatching this tape made me feel better about it. So I think the running backs are going to be great. I think Coach Petrino and Coach Fisher are going to make sure they use those guys well and use them to their strengths. And I think all of them have a lot of strengths that are going to lead to this team succeeding in the running game and succeeding in the running backs turning into receivers game. So Evan Stewart, there were a few balls that Evan Stewart should not drop that he put on the ground, but then also there were a few catches that no human being should ever catch that he did catch. So he kind of went back and forth and made up for a few balls he probably should have caught, but it's just he's elite. I mean, he is elite. He's going to be, if not this season, one of the best wide receivers in college football. He's going to be one of the best wide receivers in college football next year. And if he doesn't hear his name called in the first round of the NFL draft someday, I would be pretty shocked. He's that good of a player. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, me sitting here saying that. So, like I said, there were a couple uncharacteristic drops from him. Nothing I'm concerned about. Nothing I'm going home worried about. And same when I watched the tape a few months ago. It's not a concern to me. I mean, you're going to drop balls sometimes. It happens. But at the end of the day, he made some great catches. I mean, there was this one catch where I joke and I watched it again. It's almost like there was an invisible ladder and he stepped up on it. Like he went to catch the ball, realized Weigman threw it a hair too high. So he just like stepped on the imaginary step stool and got that extra 4 or 5 inches off the ground and just reeled in a amazing catch. And it's just like, he's special. It's truly a blessing to get to watch this young man play football for Texas A&M. And I think this year is going to be something insane. I think he's going to be a guy that we go into next year and he's going to be, I forget what's that receiver, is it Marvin Harrison, I think's his name, over at Ohio State. I think that's going to be the hype around Evan Stewart next year potentially, because of course next year will be the year where after the end of next season, next season is in not this season, the following season, he'll be eligible for the draft, and I think there'll be a lot of hype around that. So I'm excited to see what Stewart can do. Like I said, a couple uncharacteristic drops from him, but also a couple plays that just shouldn't be possible. So he was open. The Aggies have a great secondary, one of the top 10 secondary in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. We talked about that recently as well. So it's not like Stewart's doing it against nobody. He's doing it against one of the best secondaries in college football, since that's who the Aggies have. So, it's crazy to think about when he gets to pick on people who just aren't as good as guys like Tony Grimes and Sam McCall and Tariq Chappelle. When he gets to pick on other cornerbacks and safeties from other schools, I think he's going to embarrass some folks, and it's going to make Texas A&M fans happy. Ainias, the one thing I'll say that was a little concerning to me was, and this is one thing I'll be curious to see people's thoughts. There were at times I thought Ainias Smith, I wouldn't say looked lost, because we know how good he is, but it seemed like his connection with Weigman was a click off. I really am struggling to kind of explain my thoughts on this, but it's just like there were a few plays where like Smith was a step where he shouldn't have been, or Weigman threw a ball a click to his left, and just stuff like that I don't think is going to be an issue in the season. I think that's going to be something they're able to work out and kind of figure out. But it was something I wrote down when I took these notes. It was something I took away from the game. Now, of course, Mustafa Muhammad did not play in the spring game, which let Noah Thomas take over some reps, take over some plays. I was impressed with Thomas's, and we've talked about how good of a run blocker he is. You really see that come to light if you watch a tape. He takes note of it. It's something he cares about, and he prides himself in, which is good, because I don't think a lot of receivers do that. And someone with his frame, you can make a lot of money in the NFL being a guy who can win 50-50 balls and do stuff like that. So I think I think he did some impressive things. He didn't stand out a ton, but like I said, if you watched him, he would get open at times. There were some different things that stood out with Thomas. So, the offensive line, there were a few run plays where, like, there was one where Walter Nolan just like picked up, I don't remember if it was a center or the guard, but just picked him up, like threw him behind him, and then went and wrapped up Le'Veon Moss for like a 3-yard loss. I mean, it was an impressive play. And of course, that play, on plays. So the point on the offensive line was there were some positive takeaways, there were some negative takeaways, but I think at the end of the day, I was impressed with them. It was a clean pocket more times than not, and once again, you're going against one of the best defensive lines in the country. So I think the offense, you got to remember, this defense is top 10 in the country. So this offense was going against one of the best defenses in the country, which is a good thing. That means you're going to go against a team like an Auburn or an Arkansas or a Mississippi State or some teams, and that you have a better defense then, and you're going to what's going to happen is you're going to be, wow, we were going against one of the best defenses in the country. This isn't so bad. And I think that's going to be good for this team. So I think there was positive takeaways from the spring game, negative takeaways. We are going to talk about the defense. We have a special guest coming on the show tomorrow, which we'll talk about here at the end of segment 3. But we'll talk about the defensive takeaways from the spring games one day this week. But the last thing we're going to talk about today is we're going to kind of look back at this blue chip ratio that we talked about a few days ago, because some new numbers came out with it that I think should end a narrative I've seen floating around Texas A&M football. Yeah, 24/7 Sports put out their blue chip ratio, which of course had the Aggies at 73% of blue chip recruits over the last 4 recruiting cycles. The narrative I've been seeing is that the Aggies lost everybody and their mama in the transfer portal, which, they lost a lot in the portal. We know that. But my pushback to that narrative and to that argument would be the Aggies. First of all, they didn't lose a ton of production from last year. I remember when I was talking about last week on Thursday's episode, when I was kind of breaking down the what do you call it? The PFF numbers. And I was like circling all the players that I wanted to focus on. And it was like all the players at the top of these lists, and the players that were above them or around them that weren't circled is because they had moved on to the NFL. So there was, my point there is I think that this narrative is a little bit false just because of this stat right here. The update to the blue chip ratio that 24/7 Sports put out was the numbers after transfer portal stuff was taken care of. So the Aggies blue chip ratio, when you add in the transfer portal addition, subtraction, stuff like that, went from 73 to 67%. Now, that was the second most drop off behind only Oklahoma, who went down 8%. The Aggies went down 7%. But 67% blue chip ratio is still good for the 6th best blue chip ratio in the nation. 24/7 Sports, the writer who, of course, wrote this article about the blue chip ratio and runs these statistics, talked about how one of the intangibles that leads to winning national championships is having a high blue chip ratio number. And the Aggies have that 67%. Like I said, while you can argue that they did lose some players, so that narrative, I mean, obviously the Aggies lost some players. We're not going to dispute that. That's a fact. But they kept a lot of the guys. You kept your Evan Stewarts and your Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels and your Conner Weigmans and your Walter Nolans and all these players that from these last couple of classes that have been playing snaps and are going to play snaps this season. A lot of the guys you lost are guys that, I mean, I'm not going to be that guy that's like, well, they wouldn't have played anyway. We don't need them. That's not my argument. My argument is the players that were going to play this season are here. And I think everyone else left for a better in the NIL world today. People are going to leave to go put themselves in a better situation financially. It's a job at this point. And I think that's what people did. So the real main argument that I have here is the fact that after you add in all the transfer portal numbers and people that left and all that stuff, your blue chip ratio is still 6th best in the nation. So if you want to be salty about the Aggies losing commits and losing players, I get it. Call me an old guy, but at the end of the day, I like recruiting players and developing them into, guys who are on the field. You recruit the guy, then 2 years later they're on the field, then a year later they're in the NFL. That's I do enjoy that. So I get it. I get losing players isn't fun. You want the players you recruit to stick around. But at the end of the day, it's the world we live in. I have to get used to it. Everybody's got to get used to it. And like I said, at the end of the day, the blue chip ratio for this team is still one of the best in the nation. And as 24/7 Sports wrote, you have to have a good blue chip ratio to win a national championship game. I'm not saying the Aggies are going to win the national championship this season, but what I'm saying is statistically, they're one of the teams in the conversation. It's a fact that 24/7 Sports has reported it. Statistically, it is a fact based on those numbers. So that's my pushback to that narrative. I'm not saying the narrative is false, but I'm saying you still have to look at the positive side of it, that this blue chip ratio is still 67%, which is one of the best in the nation. That's the takeaway here. That's going to wrap it up for today. But before we head on out, I do want to tell everybody that tomorrow is going to be a really special episode. We are having on Locked On recruiting expert Brian Smith, one of the best in the industry. He's a guy that's been there, done that, years and years and years of recruiting expertise. He knows these kids on a personal level. He's at these camps and all these different events all the time. He's going to be on the show tomorrow to break down some Aggie recruiting, to break down where we're at with some 4 or 5-star players. It's going to be a fun episode. That's going to become more of a weekly thing, especially in the offseason when recruiting really is all that's going on in the world right now. So that's going to be fun. I'm excited to bring that to you guys. Recruiting is fun. Landing 4 and 5-star players is fun. So we're hopefully going to get a little bit of a sunshine pump from good old our buddy Brian. So be looking forward to that. That'll be on Wednesday's episode. So as always, that's going to do it. But I really appreciate you all tuning in. I'm excited for this recruiting episode. Hope you all enjoy what we had going on today. And we will see you tomorrow.